Reader, don't you, with that? Hey, morning, everyone. You guys, Gavin and his grandma, oof, that was such a beautiful story. So thank you to this church for how you guys are generous, and I have seen that many times. I'm an old friend of Clay's. My name is Jim. I am so glad and honored to be invited back. I was here last fall, and so thank you for having me here this morning, and hopefully this will be something that's helpful to you as you hope to follow Jesus more deeply in your life. And I want to say when I start, I am mad at Clay Pack. That dude, he like 3 months ago texted me, he's like, hey Jim, do you want to speak again at Grace Place? I'm like, yes. Big mistake, shouldn't have agreed to it before I saw what he wanted me to preach on today. So he follows up with a text and says, how about 1 Peter 3, 1 through 7? I'm like, fine, I didn't even read it. I'm like, yeah, I'll do it, whatever, right? You guys, I've been a pastor for 25 some years. I have skillfully avoided this passage today. Very skillfully. And so this week I'm around the house and I'm actually complaining out, around my family. I can't believe Clay. To the point where my 17-year-old son goes, wow, I've never heard my dad really complaining about a passage like this before. So my 17-year-old Micah says to me, hey, Dad, will you take me to In-N-Out Burger? And on the way, let's discuss this passage. I want to hear more. So I get sucked into buying In-N-Out Burger for him. We're on our way down, and I'm telling him about this passage that we're going to talk about today. And you know you're in trouble when your 17-year-old looks at you and just goes, you're in deep trouble. He goes, hey, I'm sorry, Dad. There is no way to preach on this and somebody not be mad. Like, you're in deep trouble. I'm like, great. So, Clay, interesting weekend to be on vacation. In fact, I sent a spy into Clay's office. I recovered his planning notes for this sermon. You want to see his planning notes for this sermon series? Check these out. I found these in his office. 1 Peter 1, important and foundational. Clay gets to speak. Fun stuff, lots of Jesus. 1 Peter 1, part 2, Clay, Jesus is the cornerstone. Let's have Sam do that one. Scroll down to the bottom, brutal. One of the toughest in the New Testament, guest speaker. All right? Thanks a lot, Clay. We're friends. He owes me like 100 lunches from Trailhead. I'm so mad at him. Oh, man. Okay, so with that, now that I've set it up. No, what I want to do before I introduce the passage to you is circle back. I thought, by the way, some of you know what the 5 love languages are. You've heard of that. I have a 6th love language, and it's making fun of people. Like if I make fun of you and you make fun of me, generally that means I like you. So I love Clay, and I love to make fun of Clay. So, but he did, and I have to, say this. I thought he did a masterful job last week on a really challenging topic. I mean, that was an extremely hard sermon to preach. I can just tell you, having heard lots and lots of people preach on that topic over the years. Actually, most people like me avoid it. He did an amazing job with that. And so I want to circle back because there is a verse that he shared that's kind of central to this entire book that we're looking at, 1 Peter. And Peter, who is writing it, says this in chapter 2, verse 12. Check this out. Be careful to live properly among your unbelieving neighbors. Then, even if they accuse you of doing wrong, they will see your honorable behavior, and they will give honor to God when he judges the world. So the context of this whole book is that Peter is writing to people in what's modern-day Turkey, in a culture that is really anti-Christian, is hostile to this new movement. The idea that a movement would come along and say that there's one God instead of many gods, I mean, you're talking about this pagan Greek culture. That was big trouble and actually cost many early Christians their lives. And so Peter is coaching them saying, look, you got to live properly among your unbelieving neighbors. You got to think through how we're going to reach the world around us. And so he addresses a series of kind of underdogs first. He talks about people living underneath the authority of this government. Remember, if you were here last week, you heard Clay talk about Nero's psycho Roman governor, and giving them kind of coaching on how do you live as an underdog in a culture like this. He talks about slaves, and now he's going to turn his attention to married couples. Thanks, Clay. Now, you might be sitting here, maybe you're middle school, high school, I see some of you guys in the front row, and you're thinking, okay, if this is about married people, I can just check out or I can TikTok, right, for the next half hour. Listen to this. This is applicable to you if you have human relationships. If you actually don't have a human relationship, you can totally TikTok. But otherwise, stick with this because there is going to be a lot in this passage that will speak to us in our relationships, and specifically, how do we reach a culture around us, and maybe even in our own homes, that is hostile toward the faith or maybe outside the faith. Ready for the passage? Okay. 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 1 and 2. Here we go. In the same way, speaking back now about how do we reach our culture? In that same way, you wives must accept the authority of your husbands. Then, even if some refuse to obey the good news, your godly lives will speak to them without any words. They will be won over by observing your pure and reverent lives. Deep breath. The NIV, a different translation, this is the New Living Translation, the NIV actually uses the words be submissive, right? You know this? So in 2022, you look at this passage, where does our immediate attention go to? Of course, we look at this first. This is so oddly anti-cultural in our place that we look at this and our attention immediately goes here. And we really start to think, is the Bible anti-women? Is the Bible kind of set up a pecking order, men first, women down the list? Because it's a passage like this that for some people, because it's been, and it's been so abused and misunderstood, that some people write off Christianity and the faith, like just right off the bat. They read this and they go, oh, phew, that's old news. And so it's important for us to understand what is actually going on here. This kind of word here, accepting the authority, I want to focus in on that for a second. There's a Greek word, it's actually kind of fun to say, it's upotasso. Isn't that fun? Upotasso. What upotasso means, the best description I've heard of it, get ready, voluntary selflessness. To be voluntarily selfless. Women, wives, be voluntarily selfless in this relationship with your husband. Now, while we are sitting around focusing on this, that actually in that culture was not like crazy news. Unfortunately, women in that culture had like almost no rights. And so that the people wouldn't have looked at that. And Peter, actually, this was not his big focus. You know what Peter's big focus was in this? Peter's big focus is from here to here. Because up until this point, he's been talking about we need to reach people outside. We need to reach the people in our culture. We need to love them well. We need to be submissive in a way to the government. That's been his culture, but now, or his message, but now he's changing the focus a little bit. Who in this verse is the one who doesn't believe? It's the husband. We're turning now from, hey, how are we going to reach outside to the world and show them who Jesus is? Now we're saying it's in our home. Now he's addressing wives and saying, the person that we got to reach is the one that you go to bed tonight every night with. That's who's the unbeliever now. Guys, in the early Christian faith, it was women who were coming to Jesus. And Peter knows it. In the early Christian faith, women came more frequently in droves to follow Jesus than did men. Thank God that has changed today, right? Can I show you a little study that was interesting? Some of you heard of Pew Research. They do all kinds of different studies. Here's one that they came out with when they interviewed people in the United States. It said this. Go ahead and flash that up. I forgot to erase that. Look at that. I'm new to the board. There was a study that said a percent in the United States who say faith is important to me. Guys, 60% of women would say faith is important to me. Only 47% of men would say faith is important to them. Any pastor can tell you the difference between Mother's and Father's Day. It is like crazy. In fact, Clay said something like Mother's Day here at Grace Place is like the second or third most attended day of the year. You know, Father's Day, it's like, can we find an MMA fighter to come in and what do we got to do? You know? Yeah, and it's not just Grace Place. Like, Father's Day is like the bottom of the barrel day for, I'm surprised every church in America isn't calling me on Father's Day to be like, hey, we need a guest speaker that day. You know, you got. Yeah, what is it? Why in the world would men have a lower rate of saying that their faith is important to them than women? What's going on? Did you realize this isn't just in the U.S.? This is across cultures. This is even across faiths. Men almost generally always say that it's less important to them than do women. Why? What's going on? I read a study this week from some guy at University of Washington who said it's because men want instant gratification. And faith generally isn't an instant gratification game, and so it's easier to go hunting. That was the conclusion. Or is it something else? Some people think this faith in relationship with Jesus is relational, and do men just generally not want to be relational? The men generally, our house saying is, they sometimes act like a Neanderthal. I have 2 teenage boys. When they come home and we talk to them about their day, hey man, how's your day, Josh? Is it good? You know what they do sometimes? I don't know if this ever happens in your house. They just go, ugh. That's their answer. Oh, okay, great. Who'd you hang out with? What'd you guys do? Ugh. You know what I do sometimes? I just go, time out. Okay, other people in other houses, they might do the Neanderthal thing. We do not do the Neanderthal thing in our house. Let me ask you again, what was your day like? It's just a struggle. Men, listen to me. No. Guys, we might be working on our handicap. We might be working on closing the deal. We might be working on some hobby. There's nothing you can work on that's more important than advancing the kingdom of God in the world. Come on. Let me just appeal to your competitiveness, if nothing else. We're losing. Come on. Guys, your faith matters. If you're sitting here, you're a middle school kid, a high school kid, a college student, you're looking out at the course of your life, there's nothing more important that you can be doing than thinking through, how am I going to advance the kingdom of God in the world? Okay? Now, Peter's looking at this, and Peter's going my only option right now is to go with the women who are in these homes and to say, you're our front line. You're our front line with these unbelieving husbands. Guys, I want to show you a couple things. I debated this. Please do not cancel me after I show you these 2 studies. I just want to make the point that men, your faith is important, and I want you to hear that this morning. There was a study out of USC that was done that was kind of interesting. It was families and faith and how religion is passed down across generations. USC folks found that there's a 20% difference in faith for kids who reported that they had a closeness with their dad. A 20% increase. What's interesting is, man, I make fun of my kids. You should ask my wife about my Neanderthalism. Karen, my wife, sometimes has said to me over the course of many years, 25 years now of being married, she said to me, hey, I see you actually spend a lot of time and effort at work figuring out strategies and plans and where are we going and spreadsheets, and you really spend a lot of time on that. Do you spend even an ounce of that thinking about our own family and our own kids? Ooh. You know what my answer is? Oh. Guys, our faith matters. Now, this is the one that I was worried to show you because it's confusing and weird. So this is out of Switzerland. So if this is confusing and weird, then we're going to blame it on like chocolate and yogurt and whatever it is that they're eating. There's a Swiss research on family influence. The percent of children who practice faith in families in which only mom is a believer was 2 to 3% in Switzerland. Ooh, that is so bizarre to me. But if both mom and dad were believers, it was 33%. If only dad, now this is weird, 44%. The answer is not women shouldn't believe so that more kids, that's just odd. And I don't want to get into that. But here's what I do want to say. You look at this and you go, guys, your faith in Jesus is important. And not just for you, for the world around you and the people in our lives. That's what we're called to follow after Jesus. And so Peter now, this is where he's going. Peter is saying, you women, you're in a tough spot. Here's what I want you to do. You're a front line, you're our vanguard, but you can also get distracted. Look at verses 3 and 4. This is where he goes with it. He says to women, don't get distracted. Don't be concerned about the outward beauty of fancy hairstyles, expensive jewelry, or beautiful clothes. This is 2,000 years ago. I just love this. You should clothe yourselves instead with the beauty that comes from within, the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is so precious to God. Basically, what he's saying is the way we win people over to see Jesus is through who we are. We generally, I don't know about you guys, maybe somebody in this room, you win every fight you get in. I would love to chat with you afterwards because I've tried that. And that does not work with my wife. And I will fight and argue and be defensive, and I lose. And Peter's saying, that's not how people are won over. You do not win people over by fighting. You win people over. Do not get distracted. People are won over by people. People win people. Fighting doesn't win people. As I was looking at this, I came across this super interesting, to me anyway, research. There's this woman at Harvard. Check this out. This woman at Harvard goes back and looks all the way back to the year 1900 and tried to look at every single national uprising that she could find across the globe. She found 300 some uprisings. And her goal was to find out which ones were successful and why. You know what she found out? Non-violent uprisings were more successful and had a lasting impact, far more than violent uprisings did. You just think Martin Luther King Jr. Isn't that Jesus? Isn't that what Jesus did? He's not just talking to women here. He's talking to all of us, saying, we want to win people over, even in our own homes. How do we approach them in who we are and the person that we're becoming? So women, that's the big message for you that Peter's going to give us here. You're pioneers. You're pioneers of this growing church movement that Jesus founded. You're going to win people over, even in your own home, by who you are, that it's irresistible. And I'm hoping as I've kind of walked through some of this that God maybe has brought to your mind a situation, somebody at work or at school or in your home or in your life in some capacity that you could pray for and maybe take this tack of saying, I'm gonna love you quietly and walk alongside you. I'm not going to win you by fighting you. Now he's going to turn to men. And again, for those of us guys, this passage, and there's others like it that have been so thoroughly abused over the years. I actually thought about, as I was putting my slides together this week, you know that like emoji where the guy's barfing? Like I almost wanted to just put that up because any guy that would approach a passage like this and see this as some sort of license for them to get their way, ouch. That is not what Peter is saying at all. That's not the thrust of this passage. And so I'm going to turn a little bit now to what he says to guys. This is in verse 7, 1 Peter 3, verse 7. Here's what the guys get. In the same way, don't just breeze over that. This first little clause is saying, here's what I'm talking to women about. In the same way, men. We're going to love, we're going to respect. In the same way I'm calling women, now I'm calling you. In the same way, you husbands must give honor to your wives. We would say, of course. In an ancient culture, they would go, oh, really? Honor to our wives? So this is, you constantly see this in a way that for us, we wouldn't necessarily notice. In an ancient culture, this is radical. Treat your wife with understanding as you live together. She may be weaker than you are, and this is physically he's referring to, but she is your equal partner. Again, radical 2,000 years ago. Equal partner in God's gift of new life. Treat her as you should. This is a zinger. Treat her as you should so your prayers will not be hindered. In other words, if you are somehow on this license where you're the guy and you're ordering your wife around, that actually is going to negatively impact your relationship with God. We do this, guys. We sometimes approach our wives in ways that we actually live the opposite of this, don't we? Even sometimes unintentionally in big and small things. I'm going to tell this story. So, a few years ago, my wife Karen really likes to garden. So she's like researching soil that she wants to put in the garden. And I want some soil because I'm in charge of the lawn. And so we're checking it out. And some of you guys know the Enneagram. I think this church is, Grace Place, you guys have looked at the Enneagram before. It's a personality profile. My wife is an Enneagram 9. And Enneagram 9s, one of the things about them, they're beautiful and they're wonderful. And one thing that drives me crazy is that they sometimes can't make decisions quickly. I'm an Enneagram 3. 3s want to decide now because we're in a hurry. So we're in this debate over soil. And we're going back and forth. And finally, on the way home from work one day, I just go, forget it. I'm going by Pioneer, and I'm going to order the soil. I'm doing it. I drive into Pioneer. I walk up to the guy, and I start to ask him some questions. And you know what he says? Oh, right? So I'm talking to him about soil. Hey, help me out. What do you think? I need the soil. I really need to get this right. My wife, blah, blah, blah. So we're talking, and finally he just goes, I got the perfect soil for you. It's called biosolids, and we're going to send this out, and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, great. 4 cubic yards. How much does that cost? $750. Awesome. When can you deliver it? Tomorrow. Fantastic, even better. I go home. I show up, I say to my wife, hey, I got us figured out. I got soil coming tomorrow. She's like, okay. Sure enough, truck pulls in, next day, dump truck. You guys, I mean, it's just this huge pile. Huge pile. And so I'm all psyched. I start just, getting it, wheelbarrow. I'm doing my thing. Karen starts researching, what is in biosolids? She sits me down. Jim, do you realize that in biosolids are human poop? You just bought a $750 4 cubic yard pile of human poop that is sitting on our driveway right now, and I'm supposed to grow my lettuce in it. I just start sweating. Guys, I bought a big pile of human poop sitting on the driveway. I'm not listening. I'm not treating my wife with understanding. I just go. It's one thing if we do this with the garden. It's another thing when we do this with how we parent our kids. It's another thing when we do this around conversations around our sex life. It's another thing when we do this with our in-laws. Another thing when we do this around how we're spending our money. Are we listening? Do we care deeply? Are we submitting ourselves to the other person? So Peter is giving us these guidelines for how men now in return ought to be giving their lives away to their wives. Elsewhere, Paul, who wrote a lot of the New Testament, here's what he says about this in the book of Ephesians, writing to this church in Ephesus. Husbands, this means love your wives just as Christ loved the church. Let me ask you this. How did Jesus love the church? All the way to the point where he would give his life on a cross. And not just physical, social too. If you've read Philippians chapter 2, you see a story about a God who voluntarily stair-stepped his way down to the bottom of society. Jesus, a little carpenter from Nazareth, who became a servant and gave his life on a cross, even death on a cross, the most shameful way that you could die. That's how much Jesus loved the church. What Peter and Paul are now saying to us men, give your life away. Go down. Guys, in a world where both male and female in a relationship, when we are married, in a world where we are voluntarily selfless, the idea of who wins is irrelevant. If we are focused on who wins, you've lost. That's not what Jesus is calling us to. Here's a quote. There's kind of the two most famous Christian therapists are these guys, Henry Cloud and John Townsend. Maybe some of you have heard of Cloud and Townsend before. They have counseled so many couples who have come to them with issues, for decades. I found this quote and I just thought it was like, wow. Check out what they say about this. We've never seen a submission problem that didn't have a controlling husband at its root. When the wife begins to set clear boundaries, the lack of Christ-likeness in a controlling husband becomes evident because the wife is no longer enabling his immature behavior. That's Cloud and yeah, that was hers, right? That one hurts. And in my experience as a pastor for 25 years, and unfortunately my experience with myself, tells me there's so much true about that. When I give my life away with understanding, treating Karen, because we are equal partners, but I'm willing to submit to her, she's willing to submit to me, the idea of who wins doesn't become a thing. Now, easier said than done, right? As we know. And here's the interesting thing that I want to leave you with. Isn't it amazing that Jesus does that with you? Isn't it amazing that Jesus submits his life to you? That he kind of like quietly is walking alongside you? That Jesus himself, when they talk about that gentle and quiet spirit, that's what he has. There's a story, I know some of you are fans of the Chronicles of Narnia. There's a book that I hope gets made into a movie or something someday. Maybe it is already, I don't know. It's called The Horse and His Boy. And it's a story about this kid named Shasta and his horse, and they're basically fleeing from people that want to harm him. I won't get into the whole story, but there's this one scene. They're on the run. It's late at night. Shasta and his horse Bree are going along, and it's dark, and he hears breathing. You know the scene? If you've read this, there's this breathing that he's hearing in the dark. And he just keeps going, like for hours. He's just terrified. And then he keeps hearing this breath in the dark. And finally, Shasta turns into the darkness and says, "Who are you?" And the voice he gets back says to him, "I am somebody who has been waiting a long time for you to talk to me. Hello, Aslan." I'm guessing something I have said today has brought up in you a relationship that you've got with somebody, work, school, home, family, that maybe is causing us, and I pray that you're going to turn to that voice who's been walking right with you, and it's finally time to talk to him about it. So I want to just take a second. Let's take a second. I'm going to give you a moment to pray. God's Spirit, please speak to me about who it is that I can be voluntarily selfless today with. Lord, thank you that you model this when you didn't have to. You're going to talk about somebody who could win a fight if they wanted to. It's you. And yet you give your life away on our behalf. God, I pray as we think about the world around us and the world in our own homes and the people we love, that you would turn us into the kind of people that are winsome and irresistible for you. God, would you do that in my heart and my life? Ooh, I'm so far away from this. We love you, Lord. You're good. And we pray that together. And everybody said in Jesus' name, amen.